Human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, causes AIDS and is one of the bigger pathogens driving human death and disease around the world. Due to its substantial impact in the global north towards the end of the 20th century, HIV and its simian precursors are among the best characterized viruses there are. Since we know so much about it, we get to ask, what allowed HIV to cross over into humans? And what can this tell us about the evolutionary interactions between viruses and their hosts? The story of how HIV got into humans begins with monkeys, which carry so-called simian immunodeficiency viruses, or SIVs, that cause chronic disease but generally don't have a huge detrimental impact on their health. This is probably a result of having evolved alongside their hosts for tens of millions of years to become better adapted and less deadly to their hosts. More recently, probably within the last several million years, two strains of monkey SIVs recombined in chimpanzees and gained the ability to spread between them. This was probably only possible due to a very specific recombination event, since chimps hunt monkeys and would have had widespread exposure to monkey SIVs over millions of years. But SIVs only crossed over into chimpanzees once that we know of, and pretty recently at that. And then, within the last 100 years, chimp SIV crossed over into humans, somewhere in the vicinity of the Congo River, and began to spread as HIV by the 1960s. Like how chimp exposure to SIVs came from hunting, it's believed that the exposure that allowed chimpanzee SIV to cross over into humans came from chimpanzee bushmeat hunting or consumption. Transmissions of viruses between species like this, or zoonoses, happen rather rarely given the time between transmission events we see here. So what stops a virus from freely infecting new species of animals all the time? I would argue that intrinsic viral restriction factors are the defining feature that has controlled the history of SIV and HIV crossover events. Our immune system is often presented as a combination of adaptive and innate immune mechanisms. Intrinsic immune factors can be thought of as a subcategory of innate immunity, but these mechanisms differ from standard innate immune mechanisms in that they are able to directly counteract viruses. In contrast, most other innate mechanisms just kind of sound the alarm bells. Tetherin is one intrinsic viral restriction factor. It counteracts the spread of HIV among other viruses by tethering their virions to the cell surface so that they can't go off and infect new cells in the body. Viruses encode their own proteins too, of course, though, including structural proteins to make their capsids and nucleic acid polymerases to replicate their genomes. We also have accessory proteins with a variety of other roles. These include messing with the host immune system. In most SIVs, including in chimps, an accessory protein called NEF counteracts tetherin by targeting its cytoplasmic domain. However, chimpanzee SIV faced a barrier when crossing over into humans because our tetherin has a deletion in its cytoplasmic domain exactly where NEF would bind to it. So how did HIV get around this adaptation? VPU is another accessory protein in SIV and HIV. In a couple of old SIVs, it actually did act against tetherin and it regained this function in humans. It achieved this by binding to tetherin's transmembrane domain instead of its cytoplasmic domain, so it can fill in where NEF faltered. This evolutionary leap allowed HIV to become the human pandemic status pathogen it is today. The evolutionary interaction between primate tetherin and HIV's anti-tetherin proteins is a microcosm of the constant interplay between living hosts and the viruses that infect them. Rapidly evolving viruses put strong positive selection on the host restriction factors that counteract them, which means that we see evolution take place at an accelerated pace in the life and death game of host-virus interactions. Well, it doesn't always have to be life and death, but that's a topic for another time.